So Rahaga are weird, right? Like as sets. Why are they like this? Here's the thing. I don't hate the sets per se. I do think that they kind of suffer from coming out in 2005 instead of something like 2003 and being sort of like Rakshi Va. Now, I understand that they'd be a little bit contrived too. We already had the Borak Va. We didn't need Rakshi Va, and would they even make sense? Maybe as like earlier forms of the Rahi, maybe they're not fully developed yet. That could have been kind of interesting, but as they stand like this, I think the sets are okay. They just miss on a few points in my opinion. And honestly, I think you could solve a couple of these points by just swapping out one piece. And it's one piece that LEGO introduced in 2005. I don't know why they didn't do it. So if you know how the head attaches on this model, it attaches via these orange thin lift arm pieces. First of all, one of the things that my fix would change is it would remove those. And those pieces are like really hard to get out of here if you don't put a pin in top. The set does not come with that pin. You have to insert it yourself. Without that pin, it's just very hard to remove these lift arms, especially the bottom one, from the Rakshi head. It doesn't really work with it super well, and LEGO very clearly didn't think about it. But the other thing, also involving the head, is the posability, because we can see that the head can turn side to side, but it can't look anywhere else. And we'll also notice, too, that this being a Metru character, a Metru era character anyway, it has a few odd choices for colors. The orange on the body, while I think it works fine as an accent color, is a bit strange to carry across all 6 sets, although you could see it as a bit of a tie-in for the Rakshi. I would still prefer, Metru colors of these thin lift arms. And if you're going to get rid of these lift arms inside the head and replace them with what I'm about to show you, then it would make no sense to have these here in the first place in that orange color. Second, why are the hands black? That's a weird one to me, because it could just as easily be the color of the socket that was introduced for several of these sets, but it's not. But it also could have been dark bluish gray, and it's not. It's just black. And it feels so off. It feels so unusual, because it doesn't need to be that way. I guess it ties into the color of this piece here, but then let me go ahead and show you my modification. It's dead simple. Just replace the parts that connect the head with a Hordika neck. Why was this not how it was done in the first place? Like, I don't get it. And here's the thing. I would be totally all for the socket here being a solid color. I don't think it needs to be transparent. That obviously you could save costs that way. You wouldn't have to introduce any new colors. You could just introduce colors of sockets that previously existed. Or even swap around like the Metru colors. So if this one's black, maybe it has like a dark green eyepiece inside of it. And the dark green one has like a Metru brown or whatever. I mean, you can have fun with it, right? But this ends up working better, in my opinion, because the head is still in the exact same position here as it was in the final model, the model that we got, but it is able to actually look around far more, and it feels a lot more Rakshi-like that way. The Rakshi introduced so much posability. Why take it away from these little baby Rakshi, So with that said, too, also this piece here being light gray instead of black. I know it's a 5-length axle. Maybe it could have been a 6-length axle to save for that. It's already a 6-length axle here, but that way, it would have just been the same colors like the Rakshi sets and further tied them together. I know they're not Rakshi. I know they're Rahaga, but still, it's just something that I would change. Lastly, one of the other things I wanted to address about these characters as well, and I've got something else to get into in this video too, is the Vertuka spinners, because some of them are just odd choices. So this one originally got dark bluish gray as a spinner, but then it was swapped out later for silver, which is unfortunate because silver was the most common color for spinner, available on all 6 of the Hordika and on all 6 of the Vizrak sets, not to mention some other sets as well. And also Gaki also got, or Gaki, whatever it's pronounced, also got a silver spinner. It's just like, oh, why, LEGO, why? Like, if you're going to give any of them a silver spinner, maybe do the green and the red, because, Iruni and Norik are going to be coming out as Tohaga sets anyway, so they can give us the solid green, solid red, whatever, right? That way you get a full set of 6, but they didn't do that. Anyway, I don't know. I think it's kind of goofy, but thankfully, at the very least, if you go out and you buy the Vertuka spinner packs, those do come in all 6 Metru colors, but it's going to be blended with silver, and I'm fine with that actually. I don't mind the silver on the backs of these guys specifically. Again, it helps to remind you of the Rakshi as sets, but it is a little bit strange to see it here as well as so many other sets. They're just overused. But the second half of this video, I also wanted to do, I was thinking about like a tier list at first, but I just wanted to do a quick comparison between the Toa Nuva weapons versus the Toa Metru weapons. This portion of the video is fully subjective, by the way. It's just my preference of these weapons in their primary and secondary uses. So I'm going to start out with fire here, because Tahu introduces us to this, which I don't know if this is called the Great Fire Sword. I think it is. But I also remember, I think, Licon Sword being called that as well. So don't quote me on that. I honestly can't remember. That said, it's a really cool looking piece. I don't use it that much in my own builds. I don't use it that much for mocks either. But the secondary function of this piece, and something that the Toa Nuva introduced to Bionicle was secondary functions for these tools, is the ability to turn it into a lava board, essentially. I think that the way it's done is a little bit tacky, but it means that LEGO doesn't have to introduce any new pieces to the set or introduce extra pieces to the set, because it literally just straps 2 of these onto the side of a foot. I can suspend my disbelief enough to think he's actually standing on it, but it is a little bit clunky. That said, the weapon, rather, for Vekama Metru is this one right here, the Kanoka launcher jetpack thing. And he uses it kind of like a jetpack as well, which I do really appreciate. This obviously has the added benefit of actually being a launcher, so you get a projectile out of it as well. And it's a decently cool looking weapon. I think even as a melee weapon, it could work out in my imagination, because it would hurt like hell to get hit by this, right? But obviously as a melee weapon in the set, it doesn't work as well because it is connected to friction pins, so it's not really held in place super secure, meaning if you were going to strike somebody with it, it's just going to kind of pivot, right? So, still cool, either way. In terms of these 2 weapons, I think I like this one more. Generally, I think swords are more usable as weapons, and I tend to use them more than stuff like this. I'm also, projectiles are fun, but I'm not the biggest user of them. And of course, the secondary use, while I think both of these have pretty phenomenal secondary uses, this one doesn't move. It attaches to the back of the character, and then it is static there, which is fine. But I like the ability that you're able to actually pose the character on this. There's some interaction between the character and the lava board in this case here. Again, a bit reductive, but I think it does work out well, especially for the first try. So I'll give it props for that. So yeah, I'm going to say the fire sword is my favorite there. Moving on to Earth, we have the Quakebreaker versus the Shovel Claw. I don't know what the name of this one is either. Terrible with names. I apologize. These are both actually pretty cool weapons in their own right. This one's going to be much harder for me to choose between, because I don't know, right? I really love the aesthetic of a chainsaw. It doesn't fit as well with other early Bionicle weapons. It's a lot more textured, a lot more detailed than other early Bionicle weapons, but I can defend that in the sense that obviously the details make sense here, right? But also every once in a while, breaking out of tradition and doing something different, doing something new and unexpected is refreshing, right? And this feels refreshing in that way. But also, like, thinking about this in its concept, right? A rock ripping chainsaw that can be strapped to your feet and rode. Like, if that's not metal, I don't know what is. So I do really like this as a concept, but I don't really use it that much in mocks personally. I think I use this one just a little bit more because it makes a decent bird beak. We saw it on the Lava Hawk in 2006. I think it works excellent there. Honestly, I'm surprised we didn't see it on like the Neve-Hawk. They designed this piece the same year. Why would you not use this instead of the weird triple claw, double claw? It's a bird. Like, this is the bird beak. Like, just use this. What are you doing? So yeah, I think I may prefer this one, but it's slight. It's very close. That said, in terms of the secondary use though, I think this one ends up winning out, so they actually kind of balance out at the end. As a melee weapon, I like this more. As a secondary use, I absolutely like this one more, because Whenua has the most memeable secondary use for his Toa Metru weapon, just turning himself into a drill, basically. Conceptually, it's a neat idea. Execution-wise, not so much. All right, moving on to brown. So we have this, which I think is... Oh, I'm going to get the name wrong. I'm not even going to try with the name, but essentially it's like a grappling hook, right? That said, it is a really cool looking piece. It's fairly simple in its design, but it's aesthetically very, very pleasing. It's easy to tell exactly what it is when you look at it. I do love the flexibility built into the actual like base here. It's pretty clever, the way that this was molded to be flexible. I like that quite a lot. With the claws here, the Kodan claws, love these. The design of these, much simpler, obviously, really even outside of Bionicle's design philosophy. There are no pistons, no anything like that here. And that's actually something you'll notice is fairly true across the board with all of the Nuva weapons, save for Onuas and Kopakas. They're the only ones with pistons on them, and they're fairly minimal at that. With that said, I tend to use this one more. I think the idea of hooking two of these together and kicking them as like a ball is a really cool idea, even though sometimes they kind of get hung up on Pohatu Nuva's kickers because of the shape of them. They do work more often than not, at least. And this one's secondary use is just store them on the back. And I think that's very annoying. Like, a grappling hook type weapon feels like something that could have a lot better of a secondary use than just strapping it on the back of the character. Very silly that that's what they ended up settling on for this one. So I think in both regards, the Kodan Claw is going to be my favorite. I like it better as a melee weapon. I like it better as a secondary use weapon, and I use it more in my own builds in general. But again, both are very good weapons. Moving on to the next one. This one's going to be a lot easier for me. We have the Arrow Slicer versus the Air Katana. The Air Katana is my favorite weapon from Bionicle. So I think that answers the question, right? Although I will say, I think this one has the better secondary use, being that it straps onto the back of the character and becomes a sort of wing. It's not really big enough to look wing-like on its own. Like, it doesn't look like it would actually carry the character's weight. But again, spending disbelief, you can absolutely imagine that maybe there's some like magic gliding power that comes out, whatever, right? And so I can absolutely see that. And I think it's handled much better here than it is with Liwa flipping his arms upside down in a really awkward way for these weapons. So I really like these ones quite a bit more for their secondary use. However, the straight edge on them, and of course the connection of the hand here specifically, does make this one a little bit harder to use, and also just doesn't look as wing-like to me personally with that straight edge. It may to you, I honestly have no idea. Still a really fun looking weapon. It is one I use a little bit less than this one, just because I don't know why. I haven't built anything around this one yet, but I do plan to. And it also comes in red. This comes in dark orange. So you at least get some colors of each of these. Moving on to the next one, we have white. And this is going to be another difficult one for me. Nuju is my favorite of the Toa Metru sets. So I am going to be a little bit biased towards this one here. On first glance, this is an easier weapon to identify. Again, it is a sword, but it is an ice skate sword. I really like the aesthetic of it. I think that's a really cool dual use for a weapon. Also comes in way more colors too. This is pearl silver here. Comes in flat silver though, but it also comes in sand blue, which a lot of people don't know about, and light bluish gray, which again, a lot of people don't know about. I should also mention this also comes in light bluish gray, and the Pohatu Kodan Claw comes in like a bunch of colors. And with that said though, really fantastic design of the weapon. I do think it's held back a little bit the way it's carried with Kopaka Nuva being a sort of double sword thing, but I can kind of understand it. It looks a little weird at first, and unfortunately because Kopaka Nuva doesn't have the same arms left to right, it means you can't really use it in both hands. I mean, I guess you can, but it's going to look a little awkward in one over the other, right? But what I like so much about Kopaka Nuva is just his forms of transportation. In the set, he uses these weapons as skates. Simple enough, right? And I think that works out really well for him. But in the movie, he also uses the shield as a sled. I believe he gives it to like Takua and Jala. Don't quote me on that. But point being, the fact that he has a weapon that can be used both as a sled and a set of weapons that can be used as skates is really clever parts usage, right? It's still true to the character having had a shield in the past, and I think these are elegant enough to reflect the original sword, even though obviously they don't look quite the same. But even better still is that you could imagine using the sled too and using this double-sided as sort of like a ski pole, right? I don't think it's quite as effective as like the ski pole from 2015 Kopaka, but I think I could see it in that use case, and so I really have to applaud that. That said, this design I really like quite a lot too. On first glance, I don't know how to tell you what this is as a weapon. It's axe-like, but then it has these broad edges on it. It's mace-like in some ways, but then it's sort of a flat plane. It's sort of like a hybrid mace axe. All I can tell you is if I got hit by this thing, I wouldn't be here recording this video. This looks like it would hurt so much. But what I think is really, truly unique about this weapon is the fact that they become snowshoes, and that is pretty clever. Like, I'm gonna be honest, that would not have been the first thing I thought about. So many different modes of travel against ice and snow that came from Bionicle, more so than like any other element got modes of travel, if you will, right? We saw lava boards several times, but we saw skates, we saw sleds, we saw ice, I was gonna say ice skates as when I was trying to say snowshoes, and we even saw skis again in 2015. So it's like, that's a lot. That's a lot to ask for, and I'm happy with all of it. So in that regard, I don't know which I like better. It's really tough for me. I think maybe Kopaka Nuva ekes out, but I don't even know if that's true. I like the fact that he has two different, things held in each hand, right? He has a shield, he has a sword. He can kind of use one or the other at different times. So, like, yeah, it's tough. It's tough, man. All right, the last one here is going to be Gali Nuva versus Nokama. And right off the bat, I love the aesthetic of this weapon. It looks so elegant. It looks so cool. But where this feels like it should be able to connect to the bottom of the metru foot as a flipper, it doesn't. You can definitely attach it to the bottom of the foot there, like there's nothing stopping you, it has pinholes for it, but it doesn't reach out quite far enough in front of the foot to feel appropriate as flippers. And I think that's so unfortunate, because if they had moved these pins further back, it would look fantastic. And yeah, it would be a rehash of the year before having flippers on the bottom of the feet, but it is an aquatic character, so like having two characters with flippers doesn't feel that out of place. That said, I would say both weapons are axe-like. This is more pickaxe-like with its shape and obviously its narrow sort of handle to it, right? This weapon is a much simpler design, clearly, but I do like it quite a bit as well. I think I see this one a lot more as like a beaver tail or a duck bill or something like that. So I can associate more animal builds with this, and as a Rahi builder, that's important to me. Whereas this one, it's harder for me to associate with a specific animal. There are definitely things you can do with it, and I could even see still a bird beak, with something like that, or of course like this, the way it's used in the combination model. But that said, in terms of the secondary use for the weapon, this one is definitely going to eke out. I think this one's going to win overall because it gets used as flippers, whereas this one, again, just gets connected to her back, and I think that's so unfortunate. One of the reasons, and I can't know this for sure, and I wouldn't even be surprised if it's not true, that I think that Lego went with this design for Nokama specifically is because she had the longest arms in her Rahaga form. And this is a long weapon overall, but it's not really any longer than the other metru weapons. I think it just feels longer because of how narrow it is, and because of how much emphasis is towards the base end of the weapon. So maybe that's the thing that they were thinking about. I don't know. Probably not. In hindsight, looking at it compared to any other weapon that had come out up until this point, the metru and the Toa Nuva really sort of restrained their weapon size to a very specific number of like studs, right? And didn't surpass that. And then obviously you get Toa Likon, and he blows all of that philosophy out of the water. But I think for that type of set, it makes total sense, even if I don't really care for the connection on that sword. And I think it was done better overall in 2015 with this one, since it's right in front of me. So, as a recap, Ahu's fire sword I like better. Onua and Winua's, I think I like Winua's shovel claws a little better. They're also just a good little iteration of the claws from Onua while being a unique thing. And remember, Winua Rahaga also had a drill staff, so seeing a drill as his weapons in his metru form is pretty cool. For Liwa, it's versus Matau, it's going to be Liwa all the way. For Pohatu, it's going to be Pohatu. In most cases, I think it is the Nuva form that I prefer. In fact, I think 5 out of 6. Ice is really the only one that I couldn't really pin down. So 4 out of 6, I prefer the Nuva weapons. Water, fire, stone, and air. Yep, and then ice I can't tell you, and black, earth, is, I guess, this one. So, all right, I've kept you here for long enough. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe because it helps the channel out. Let me know your thoughts. What of these is your favorite weapons? Or if you can't tell me which of these is your favorite, what is your favorite Bionicle weapon in general? And also, what do you think about the Rahaga as a whole? Their part in the story, their play in the story is what I was going to say, and just generally their build overall. I do think that their combination models are pretty all right. I think they're a little bit underrated, especially given the parts that they use, because they use a lot of the same parts. They're definitely budget sets. With that said, though, you can check out the Discord if you want to take the conversation further. Linked down in the description below, or you can check out the Instagram or Patreon, all of which helps the channel out. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.